Okay, we're back now with a little Zodiac segment, and joining us, of course, is our contributor, Michael Butterfield. How is Arizona today?
Arizona's nice and sunny today. It's in the winter.
Yeah, no snow. No, it's
No,
no freezing, hey? Oh.
no, I think it's only snowed a couple times here. I remember it snowed a little bit once when I was playing football with somebody in high school, but other than that, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, it's just that so much of the South now, hey, is freezing. But hey, that's okay. So what are we going to talk about today? I was thinking let's talk about some of the myths that are out there with Zodiac and kind of what your feeling is on them. So what do you think? The arrest of Arthur Lee Allen.
Hmm.
Now, there's a lot of people that talk about that and that the police were going to arrest him, but of course, he died.
Yes.
So what's your thought on that?
Well, it's an interesting myth. It's very persistent, largely because shortly after Arthur Lee Allen died, Arthur Lee Allen was the prime suspect by the Vallejo Police Department and the San Francisco Police Department in the early 1970s. And the police examined his fingerprints, which did not match suspected Zodiac fingerprints. They examined his handwriting, and every expert who examined the handwriting said that Allen did not write the Zodiac letters. But shortly after Allen died, the Vallejo Police Department, Roy Conway, the captain of the Vallejo Police Department, indicated that Allen might have been charged if he had actually lived. And that sort of took on a life of its own until it became years later that Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac. The police knew it. They were going to charge him, but then he went and died on them and spoiled their fun. And what most people don't understand is that, and I don't blame people for not understanding this because it requires a lot of reading and research, is that the evidence that has been used to accuse Arthur Lee Allen doesn't really hold up when subjected to scrutiny. So the idea that he was going to be arrested is based on the idea that police had all this solid evidence linking Allen to the crimes and that he could have been charged and prosecuted. When in reality, if you look at what police actually had at that time, it's an interesting dilemma. Most of the information that police cite as evidence linking Allen to the crimes or that they believe links him to the crimes is information that was acquired during the first few weeks or months of the original investigation back in 1971. There wasn't a lot of information that came out after that, and most of the information that came out after Allen was initially a suspect came out after a best-selling book used a lot of distorted ideas and a lot of fiction to make it seem as if Allen was the Zodiac. So this impression is based partly on truth and then partly on fiction and myth, because in order to prosecute Arthur Lee Allen, you would have to have some solid evidence linking him to a specific Zodiac crime. Each one of these crimes took place in a different jurisdiction. And Roy Conway, when he said that they were going to charge Allen, he must have been talking about the shooting at Blue Rock Springs Park on the night of July 4th, 1969, where Darlene Ferrin was killed and Michael Migeot was shot and wounded but survived to tell the story. That's the only crime that the Vallejo Police Department had jurisdiction over, so he must have been talking about prosecuting Allen for that shooting. Now, some of your listeners may know that Michael Migeot, 20-something years later, identified Arthur Lee Allen as the man who shot him. He was shown a selection of photographs, and he pointed to Allen's picture and said, "That's him. That's the man who shot me." And then the investigator said, "Are you sure?" And Michael Migeot pointed to the photograph of another individual in the photo lineup and said, yes, he had a face like him. Now, I've jokingly tried to characterize this by saying that he was basically saying that Arthur Lee Allen committed the crime but was wearing someone else's face when he did it. I'm not saying that that's literally what he meant, but it gives you an idea of how preposterous this could get if Arthur Lee Allen was actually in a courtroom. A defense attorney would be able to take, if Michael Migeot was on the stand, a defense attorney would easily be able to discredit him as a witness, not just because he said that the killer had a face like someone other than Allen, but also because the description he had given of the killer back in 1969 did not match Arthur Lee Allen in 1969. Also, the detective who interviewed Michael Mageau in the hospital later told me that he didn't think that Michael Mageau could identify that man under any circumstances, largely because he didn't really get a good look at him, according to his own statements in 1969. He didn't get a good look at the killer. He only saw him briefly in a profile view as he was walking away. And in the 1990s, when Mageau was shown Allen's photograph, it was his driver's license photograph, which is a straight-on photograph, not a profile view. So any attempt to put Michael Mageau on a stand would probably result in disaster for a prosecutor, because any competent defense attorney would be able to discredit or at least cast doubt on Michael Mageau's testimony and his identification of Allen. Without that identification, there is virtually nothing linking Arthur Lee Allen to the shooting at Blue Rock Springs. The only evidence that people have been able to cite over the years as evidence linking Allen to the Zodiac crimes is largely based on the idea that he said things that were similar to the Zodiac letters. And in most instances, he allegedly said these things after the Zodiac letters were published in the newspapers. So there's no evidence that Arthur Lee Allen had any special knowledge about these crimes. But also, whatever he said, he could have just gotten from the newspapers in most of these instances. And since every handwriting expert who ever worked for the government concluded that Arthur Lee Allen did not write the Zodiac letters, it'd be virtually impossible for a prosecutor to try to introduce those Zodiac letters in a courtroom. Can you imagine trying to prosecute somebody for the Zodiac murders without mentioning the word Zodiac in the courtroom? That could get very difficult, and the only link to the Zodiac are those letters. So if every expert determined that Arthur Lee Allen didn't write those letters and a prosecutor tried to introduce those letters as evidence in a trial, any competent defense attorney would probably be able to have those letters blocked and inadmissible as evidence. But if the prosecutor somehow managed to introduce them, all the defense attorney would have to do is say, well, your own experts have told you that my client did not write those letters. So therefore, you can't claim that Arthur Lee Allen is linked to the Zodiac letters because he said something that's similar to a Zodiac letter if he didn't write the letter and he made most of these statements after those letters were published for the public to see. So it's a really...
Why was he so popular as a candidate to be Zodiac?
Well, you know, most people didn't hear about Arthur Lee Allen in any real way as far as the public is concerned until the publication of Robert Graysmith's book Zodiac in 1986, which talked about Arthur Lee Allen but used a pseudonym Bob Hall Starr because Allen was still alive and Graysmith could be sued. So he used this name Bob Hall Starr to talk about Arthur Lee Allen. And a lot of the information in that book was either not true or it was exaggerated or distorted. So when that book came out, a lot of people, including myself, you know, the first few months after that book came out, it seemed like, well, the case has been solved. But after that, a lot of it started to fall apart under scrutiny. And of course, in 1991, police searched Arthur Lee Allen's home and his name became a matter of public record. It was leaked to the media. But he became a suspect again in the 1990s because someone he had known in the past was facing a pretty stiff sentence for, I believe, armed robbery, and contacted the police and said, look, you know, Arthur Lee Allen came to me and said, I'm the Zodiac, and I'll prove it to you. I'm going to kill a cab driver. And then the Zodiac killed a cab driver. And we're supposed to believe that this guy was telling the truth, even though he had a very obvious ulterior motive for implicating Allen. And that's sort of what put Allen in the public sphere. Now, in the 1970s, in 1971, someone who had known Allen came to the police and said, Allen told me he was going to commit crimes and call himself the Zodiac and write taunting letters to the media and everything. And police started their investigation of Allen, which lasted a little more than a year. They gathered all of this information. They got a search warrant. They searched Arthur Lee Allen's trailer. They didn't find anything linking him to the crimes. His fingerprints didn't match suspected Zodiac fingerprints. The experts determined he didn't write the Zodiac letters. And at that point, the police pretty much dropped him as a suspect and moved on to other people. And they continued to investigate others for quite a long time as if they did not believe that Allen was the Zodiac. And it's interesting because one of the investigators who was involved in the investigation of Allen decades later said that handwriting and fingerprints could identify the Zodiac, and which raises the question that Arthur Lee Allen's fingerprints and handwriting didn't match the Zodiac. So was he essentially telling you that Arthur Lee Allen wasn't the Zodiac? That same investigator also said that much of the stuff about Allen in Graysmith's book wasn't true.
Well, then why did Detective Conway from Vallejo Police say that then about, he would have been arrested?
Well, it's an interesting comment because it has to be viewed in a context. And I think the context, if you're reading the original articles where he's quoted saying that, at that time, another individual had come forward accusing another suspect, Harvey Hines, a retired police officer, believed that a suspect named Larry Kane was the Zodiac. And he was getting a lot of attention in the media. And shortly after that, one woman who may be a surviving Zodiac victim named Kathleen Johns, we don't know for sure if she was a Zodiac victim or not, but she claimed that she had escaped from the Zodiac when he attempted to abduct her in 1970. Kathleen Johns identified Larry Kane as the man who had abducted her. So there was a lot of this attention in the media, and I think Conway was sort of put on the spot. And in response to that, because the whole quote, I wish I could remember the whole quote right now, but he says something like, well, Harvey would get off of that kick if he could just see what we had against Arthur Lee Allen, and we would have charged him if he had survived. Now, when you look at the Vallejo Police Department files, and especially the FBI files concerning the Vallejo Police Department's discussion of this issue with the Bureau at that time, it's very clear that they really didn't have any evidence implicating Allen in the Zodiac crimes, and that Conway's statement appears to have been based largely on the idea that Michael Mageau had identified Allen. But as I pointed out, that identification is considered rather iffy, and it's not considered a valid identification by the Vallejo Police Department. So his comment may have been little more than an attempt to deflect people away from Harvey Hines and the Larry Kane theory, and he may have spoken impetuously. He may have just said something off the top of his head that may not necessarily have been true, because later on the local prosecutors indicated that probably nothing was going to come, or early, before that, before Allen died, one of the prosecutors mentioned that it was very unlikely that anything would happen from all of this. And when he said that, they had virtually all the evidence known about Allen. The only difference was this alleged identification by Michael Mageau, which occurred shortly after that. And again, the police did not consider valid, and his own statements would make it very difficult for him to withstand scrutiny in court. So Conway may have made that statement while trying to dismiss someone else's theory by bolstering his own idea of what they could have done. But if you look at all the information, especially, like I said, in the FBI files, it's very clear that the Vallejo Police Department had not made any attempt to develop charges against Allen, and that they were not in a position to do so when Allen died. They really hadn't gathered any information which would justify an arrest. And even, you can arrest almost anyone on anything most of the time, but the problem comes when you have to press charges and they have to appear in court for a trial. And in a courtroom, you have to have some solid evidence. And from everything available to me in the police files, the interviews I've done, the Vallejo Police Department did not have sufficient evidence to warrant pressing charges against Arthur Lee Allen. And it's extremely unlikely that any competent prosecutor would have pressed charges against Allen, knowing that the evidence was so slim and knowing that in a courtroom he would probably lose.
Did that sort of thing affect his family, do you think?
Yes, I spoke to members of Arthur Lee Allen's family, and it was very difficult for them. One of the problems is that that book Zodiac that came out in 1986, it has a lot of misinformation in there about Arthur Lee Allen as it relates to his family. According to that book, Arthur Lee Allen's family suspected that he was the Zodiac and held a family meeting to discuss what to do about it, and then decided to report him to the police. If you read the actual police reports, that is not what happened. The estranged friend of Allen's told police about this story where Allen allegedly confessed his desire to commit Zodiac crimes before the Zodiac crimes began. And then the police went and interviewed Arthur Lee Allen's brother and his sister-in-law, and they were both surprised to learn that Allen was suspected of the Zodiac, and they both made it perfectly clear that they did not believe he was the Zodiac. They also pointed out that the estranged friend was estranged because he had accused Allen of attempting to molest one of his children. And Arthur Lee Allen's brother thought it was worth mentioning that this might be an ulterior motive for him to make up a story about Allen. And most of the people that I know, that is the overall belief, that this person either invented these stories or he exaggerated these stories to get back at Allen for some reason. But having that kind of information in a best-selling book, it makes people think it's true. And so I've often thought about what it must have been like, because if you believe Allen was the Zodiac, then you probably don't have a lot of sympathy for him.
Right.
And if you believe that he wasn't the Zodiac, there's still the problem that he was a known and convicted child molester, so it's difficult to have sympathy for him. But imagine what it would be like to pick up a best-selling book and read in it that your family thought you were a murderer and turned you into police, and maybe not knowing for a fact that that wasn't true. Arthur Lee Allen's family was very upset by the publication of that book. And they told me in a couple of interviews that I did a long time ago that it was very problematic for their family, because there was this alternate reality in which they thought he was the Zodiac, they turned him into police, and they implicated him in the crimes when that isn't true. And, you know, when you see like the movie Zodiac, it shows Arthur Lee Allen's brother and sister-in-law talking to police, but it omits important information that they gave police, which casts doubt on the idea that they thought he was the Zodiac. So the popular book and the popular movie tell one version of the story, which isn't the true story. And unfortunately, that does cause a lot of problems for the real people who are involved in this story.
Wow. Well, it's a rough one, but he's dead now.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, I mean, that's great. Great information. Thanks very much. Again, that was our little Zodiac segment for the week. And our Zodiac contributor is Michael Butterfield. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Al.